Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Every Monday and Wednesday, and breaking news, possibly Fridays, at least through April, we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated World of Warcraft Classic. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and I am an absolute nut for the vanilla days, the bygone era of World of Warcraft. And I also happen to be somewhat of a podcast veteran. So I figured, why not combine my two passions and bring you this very show? However, you might be asking, why the hell should I listen to this Australian guy talk about World of Warcraft? Well, this Australian guy is kinda glad that you asked, because I think you're going to like what you're about to hear. It's not necessarily me that you'll actually be listening to. It's you. Huh? You say, as you do a double take? Well, the thing is that I am far from the go-to authority on all things World of Warcraft. But I know someone who is. It's you, the listeners and fans and people who don't pull the wrong mob because they haven't mastered tab targeting yet after 13 years for some reason, like someone else I know. And that's why this podcast is about you and what you are talking about throughout the week online, as much as it is about this amazing game that we've come to know and love. I'm merely a fanboy of World of Warcraft and a mouthpiece for the news and conversations that we're all taking part in online. I try to stay as neutral as possible and present both sides of all the discussions that you're about to hear in this show. But just before we get to the good stuff, please do bear with me for just a little tiny bit of housekeeping, everyone. I just want to tell you that you can find everything Countdown to Classic online at countdowntoclassic.com. But more importantly, please do subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever it is that you get this podcast from. Just hit that little subscribe button. And also, if you really want to help the show out, it would do me a huge favor if you could leave a review. You don't even have to write anything. Just tap that review, whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 4 or 5 stars. I don't care. You do what you feel. But reviews really help this show grow, everyone. So please, if you haven't left one yet, please go ahead and do that for me if you're a regular listener of the show, or even if you're a first timer and you just love what you're hearing. Now, following on from that, you can also find Countdown to Classic on all socials, on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube at Countdown to Classic. We're also on Twitter at Count2Classic with the number 2. Now, one small favor that I would ask is that if you're currently listening to this episode on YouTube and you're liking what you're hearing, or you're about to like what you're about to hear, then please do click the download or stream links on the website as well, as I primarily lean on those figures as a look into how the show is growing. As Countdown to Classic is a show about you, the players, this is a highly interactive podcast, and I absolutely want and need to hear your feedback or input on the show. You can drop me a line on all the socials that I just mentioned, or email feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. If you've listened to previous episodes of Countdown to Classic, you will have very much noticed, everyone, that when people write to me and take the time to say hello, I usually read it out. So if you want your 15 seconds of WoW fame, hit me up with a memory lane submission, a fun request, or even just asking for a shout out. Say hello and it will probably happen. Now, I'll have more show news and shout outs towards the tail end of the show, so please do stick around for that. But for now, it's time to get to the news with this Monday's edition of Forum and Fauna. Every Monday, Countdown to Classic comes to you with 3 pieces of news of the week in relation to World of Warcraft Classic. Now, what was in the news this week? Well, we turned to our very first item, and it was actually a notable piece of news. Sometimes we lack a little bit of news when it comes to World of Warcraft Classic, as a lot of you know. But the last couple of weeks, we have actually had a few little pieces of information come our way. And this lead news item is something official from Blizzard. Now, you might balk and say, Josh, that's not World of Warcraft Classic related, but I can assure you, I will draw the link for you. So have a bit of faith in me and your favorite Australian, and we'll get there, because the first lead news item is the announcement of the Battle for Azeroth release date. If you hadn't quite heard yet, there has been a release date announced for World of Warcraft's latest expansion, Battle for Azeroth. It was unknown since the announcement of the expansion, but we've now been told that we have a firm date of August 14th, 2018. Now, prior to that, we'd just been told basically that it would be here by mid-September, and we didn't have any kind of firm, concrete date. But now Blizzard has come out and given us one. Obviously, this news created some ripples online amongst the Classic community, and we turned to the WoW Classic subreddit, where a thread was created titled, Battle for Azeroth, announced August 14th. What does this mean for vanilla WoW? And that was created by Reddit user Chadsters, who basically said the following. I think most of us were expecting Battle for Azeroth to be released around the September-October time of 2018. With the release date being closer than expected, do you think we can expect a sooner release date for vanilla, being perhaps the spring or summer of 2019? I'm pretty curious to what you all think. And so, what that user has raised is a fair point and brings us to the very first discussion point of this episode. Will the slightly earlier than expected release of Battle for Azeroth have any impact whatsoever on Classic's release date? Or does it give us a fresh insight into an educated guess as to the release of Classic? So basically, does this tell us something or nothing? Now, as we do here on Countdown to Classic, if this is your first time listening, we argue for both sides of the coin in every conversation point that we bring up. And with today's first topic, we'll start with the first camp, being that the news does mean something for World of Warcraft Classic. And we start with this post from Reddit user Sineun, and I know I've mispronounced that, so I do apologize to that person, but they say, perhaps the early-ish release of Battle for Azeroth will coincide with a major announcement/release date of Classic at the next BlizzCon. And the point that user raises is that the vast majority of us know about BlizzCon, Blizzard's mostly annual celebration of all things Blizzard that's held in Anaheim, which I've not been to, but I'm absolutely dying to get to one year. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, Blizzard. It is very much so happening again this year, and generally it happens around that first week of November. Thus, by the time BlizzCon rolls around this year, Battle for Azeroth would be, well, about 2.5 months into its run. Whilst it wouldn't necessarily be considered old news, there may not be much to tell us about Battle for Azeroth that, one, we don't already know by that stage, and two, that they're ready to divulge regarding content much later down the track. And so, with a major convention going on, of which World of Warcraft is arguably the greatest attraction, this may leave Blizzard in the situation where they're standing on stage essentially wearing the Emperor's new clothes. Unless they had another major announcement up their sleeves. And given the lack of news we've gotten thus far, it would be quite the PR bombshell to drop. The rabid fan base is going insane over Blizzard's silence and the possible reasons for it, to the point that we're now questioning why a company that has been somewhat transparent in the past, I think, if you're raging that I just said that because you think Blizzard always shuts up shop and never tells us anything, then please email the show and let me know. Say, Josh, no, this company is famously silent. I think they've been reasonably okay in the past. But anyway, to think that they are now shutting up shop like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory in regards to Classic alone is a little bit of a head scratcher. However, wouldn't the perfect cure to that silence be a huge glitz and glamour information dump in front of tens of thousands of people and a global audience online? It just seems to make a lot of sense to me. But we move on to the camp that says that the Battle for Azeroth release date means absolutely nothing to Classic through user Embriel, who says the following: "It doesn't mean anything. The teams are completely separate." And what Embriel is raising there is this point. Why are we even bothering wondering if this will have any effect on things with Classic? We don't even have to guess if there's any overlap in staff. We've been told that they have a separate team for Classic. We've seen the job openings, and we all sent in our joke applications under the name J. Allen Brack and listed our previous game experience as having done countless 5-person runs through UBRS in vanilla. Lolsies. But I digress. We also saw those job openings close, and we're quite aware that the new team is hard at work on Classic and are busy doing their own thing, separate from the retail crew. So why would Battle for Azeroth's release affect them in any way, shape or form? Well, user Frost Wilson mentions this. But the market is shared. There's always a peak in subscriptions just before release and for the next quarter on. World of Warcraft got back to 10 million users after Warlords of Draenor's release in the fourth quarter of 2014. It almost got back to 10 million with Legion in the third quarter of 2016. So let BFA rise and die, and then Classic. And the point they're raising is that whilst the teams might very well be separate, they all fall under the Blizzard umbrella, and the market that they target with their projects is most certainly shared. I'm not breaking news by saying that Blizzard, whilst having different teams and games and focuses perhaps, still operate under that one unified banner, and everything on every team is done to advance the bottom line of Activision Blizzard and in turn their shareholders. It's important to remember that in order to achieve peak capitalization on a project as big as Classic could be, there will be somewhat of a synergy between the release of what is obviously relatively different projects, in spite of both of them holding that title of World of Warcraft. Thus, the Battle for Azeroth announcement is notable in that it gives us a reconfigured timeline which we can now look to project that first lull in Battle for Azeroth content, which may give rise to the perfect release window for Classic. But we move back to the naysayers with this post from user Weisenbach, who says, "For reference, Burning Crusade, January 2007. Wrath of the Lich King, November 2008. Cataclysm, December 2010. Mists of Pandaria, September 2012. Warlords of Draenor, November 2014. Legion, August 2016. And that's all they wrote. And obviously what they're trying to spell out there is that it's not hard to see Blizzard's release schedule and the way in which they work in relation to new content. It comes about every 2 years like clockwork. If Battle for Azeroth is now coming in August of 2018, then wave goodbye to Classic coming anytime soon, kiddies, and say hello to your late 2020 release date. Why would they shift on the status quo? Well, that question seems to be easily answered with this retort from the meaningful camp, who come back with this post from user Henhouse0, who says, the next expansion will probably follow that, yes, but I doubt they'll schedule vanilla to release at the same time as an expansion. Likely it will be somewhere in between those gaps. Now, again, I'm not reinventing the wheel or blowing anyone's minds perhaps by bringing this information to you, but just to highlight what they're saying. They're basically pointing out that it's incredibly unlikely that we wind up in a scenario where Blizzard treats Classic as an expansion in order to fall into the timeline that we heard before, and essentially skipping a beat in a way, and not having another retail expansion until 2022. Now, I don't even need to go into why that's not going to happen and how ridiculous that might be. Obviously, as this user suggests, we need to look away from the normal release schedule that Blizzard has abided by in the past and realize that Classic will likely be shoehorned in somewhere between expansions. The question is, where? We go back to the proverbial naysayers, again with this post, who suggests that the Battle for Azeroth news is not where one should turn when predicting a Classic release date. And it's user Thumbs Up who says this, or I should say Thumb 5 Up. Honestly, it all depends on Blizzard Activision's current release timeline. Activision shareholders will want to see a new revenue stream only when nothing else is planned to release, or they're expecting a lesser performing release/expansion. Blizzard is definitely becoming more and more quarterly focused. For example, Hearthstone is now planning 4 expansions per year, which coincidentally aligns with 4 quarters per year. World of Warcraft rolls out expansion patches every few months to keep subscriptions and revenue up. And that user's point is this. Regular content updates can be predicted with more confidence when looking even deeper than that 2-year expansion release schedule that I read out earlier. Blizzard has seen their business model adapt and change with an ever-evolving gaming market over the past 13 plus years of World of Warcraft's life cycle. The shareholders' desires will always be at the forefront of Blizzard's minds, and a quarterly focus falls in line with quarterly financial reports. Retail patches with further content do hit on a semi-regular basis, and perhaps looking at the start and end of quarters is the way to go. Do we now turn to which quarter it will be that will see that noticeable downturn in Battle for Azeroth content and subscriber interest? Will it be January 2019? April 2019? How about September 2019, 1 year after Battle for Azeroth's release? Now, content droughts typically, from what you all seem to say in forums online, occur in retail around 6 to 9 months after an expansion drops, which puts us in a February to May window if we're applying that to Battle for Azeroth. So if we're so fixated on quarters, then that may fall in line perhaps with April 2019. God, can you imagine if they dropped it on April Fools next year? How many minds would that blow? My God. Anyway, we go back to the argument that the Battle for Azeroth date means a whole lot more than you think, with user Prismatic Star, who says the following. The sooner they release Classic, the sooner they can collect money from it. Let's say there are 2 million people who are interested in Classic, but not Battle for Azeroth, so not counting overlappers. 2 million people times $15 is $30 million a month. No amount of careful timing is going to make up for skipping $30 million each month that you delay. And obviously the point that user raises is a relatively simple one to wrap your mind around. The sooner they get this thing out, the sooner they can get to rolling in the money. Cha-ching. Battle for Azeroth being pushed up can only mean that classic development is perhaps going well and has been pushed right on up along with it. This is not a new game. As much as Blizzard have said that the classic project is a lot of work, producing the vanilla experience to run optimally on modern tech and all that jazz, it's still not a new game. Perhaps development is going swimmingly, and they're already a couple of months ahead of schedule. They have every interest in getting this game out there ASAP. And whilst, yes, they do abide by the Blizzard it will be ready when it's ready mentality, they are quite aware that World of Warcraft is the goose that lays the golden egg. And getting out something that has people rabidly clamoring for it is in their best interest to push hard on a completion date. Perhaps there is a lot of OT being put in at Blizzard as they burn the midnight oil on this one, and it's already perhaps having some results. Finally, as Countdown to Classic loves a little bit of unsubstantiated internet gossip, we finish this week's opening topic with this post from user Excalibur457, who says the following. Summer 2019 during a BFA content lull. Same guy who gave me this information had given me full details on BFA, Coltiris, Pirates, South Seas, and 7.3. Argus in early 2017 when no one else had any public info. Believe me or not, I don't care. I'm fully confident in my guy's reputability. He's in esports and is personal friends with several mid-level Blizz employees. Now, having just spent 90 minutes analyzing potentially baseless claims in a previous episode, please do go back and listen to episode 11 if you haven't yet. It's a bit of an interesting one. I figured it was only fair to introduce perhaps another baseless claim here by virtue of a bit of forum gossip. I love it. How good is the internet and forums? But here's the best part. Part of me just wants to believe it. Logic taps me on the shoulder and says, no, Josh, just walk away. But I love the concept of the mysterious post, the cloak and dagger inside information that just drops little nuggets like this for people like me to pick up. This community is just the best, tantalizing each other like this, and I absolutely love it. I really do. Do I believe it? Not for a second. But will I think about it? Absolutely. Mainly because the information contained within this kind of gossip would bring us Classic closer than my prediction. And if anyone cares, my prediction is either one of two dates and no other. I'm basically thinking, and I've readjusted recently, that it's either going to be 1, April 2019 during that first proposed content lull, or 2, November 2019 for the 14th anniversary. I really do think it's one of those two dates and no other, but what the hell do I know? Happy to be proven wrong. What's your date? Send it into the show and let me know. Let's see if we can get a bit of a closest to the pin thing happening. Write to me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. Anyway, now we move on to topic number 2 of the week. And there was a little bit more World of Warcraft news last week, but this was of the much more unofficial variety. On Saturday, March 31, there was a vanilla release of World of Warcraft, albeit on a private server. Now, just a little bit of a long preamble warning, so strap yourself in for this one, just while I give you a couple of points first up. Before you shriek and faint at the thought of, oh, Josh, how could you? You can't speak about the server that shall not be named. However, I'm quite happy to be as brave as a young Harry Potter here and broadcast the name out to the world and growing listener base of Countdown to Classic. You ready for it? Chronos 3. Oh my God, he said it! Why would I discuss private servers, you ask? Well, here on Countdown to Classic, as the top of the show tells you each week, we discuss the news, gossip, and hot button issues of all things World of Warcraft Classic. And the morality and legality of private servers doesn't get much more hot button. And I'm positive that the news of a large one opening, being the first major private server to open in a post-classic announcement world, and the kind of attention that that would garner, I would suggest is highly newsworthy. So if you're the kind of person who wants to put the earmuffs on in the fear that merely being seen listening to this podcast could endanger your account or terms of service, then I won't be upset at all if you choose to skip this section or simply hold your hands to your ears for the next 20 minutes, loudly shouting, "La la la, I can't hear you, I can't hear you." Just make sure that when that's happening, you're not at your own wedding being asked if you would take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife. It might not go down so well. But seriously, apologies to anyone I might bend out of shape with this topic. But here we go. Let's get into what the opening of K3 meant for World of Warcraft Classic. Now, if you're not aware, Chronos is a private server that runs a client with patch 1.12.1 without the need for subscription fees. I won't touch on the arguments of the morality and legality of private servers in depth today at all. That's for a future episode. But this server, in the fact that it has no source of income and running WoW servers ain't cheap, interestingly, has decided to attempt to subsist purely through donations. This raised somewhat of an eyebrow for me in regard to what happens to those donations, as obviously there have been some well-documented dramas in the past with private servers and misappropriation. And I may well dedicate one of our Wednesday lore or history episodes to the history of private servers. But again, we won't get into that today. The real reason I wanted to discuss K3 is due to the analysis that could be done in relation to a shitload of people descending on a WoW server with all of that classic hype behind them and getting a slight idea of how things might be when classic drops. But that would infer that the K3 experience would be anything close to what WoW Classic is going to be like. So, the question is, what were the pros and cons from the K3 opening? We'll start with the con camp with this submission from the Chronos forums with user Alibaba, who writes the following. As the title says, I had a very bad experience since the server launched. Maybe I just have bad luck, or maybe there's nothing I can do about it. I don't know. Yesterday, I tried to log in since launch at 2 p.m, and I finally made it 3 hours later into the game. After I played for about 3 to 4 hours, I got kicked from the server, and I couldn't log in again. The devs were saying if you get DC'd, you can log in again within 2 minutes and bypass the queue if there is one. And today the same thing happened again. I waited an hour to log in. I played like 2 to 3 hours and then I got kicked and couldn't log in again. So the 2-minute timer where you should be able to reconnect instantly is kind of a big lie. I love the vanilla experience and I really just have one big question. Is this new server's strategy or policy, or whatever you want to call it, to randomly kick people and shut the doors for them for a certain amount of time so that others can log in? Because I don't want to play this joke every day from now on. Waiting 1 or 2 hours in front of my display and trying to log in like a maniac only to get to play for a few hours and then get kicked again, thus starting the cycle all over from the beginning again, isn't fun. It would be nice if there would be some kind of statement from the Chronos team regarding this issue, and especially the quote-unquote 2-minute reconnect timer, which obviously doesn't exist, at least for me. I'm interested if other people have had the same issue. Now, the reason I read out that point is that with the opening of Chronos 3, this was no different to any other private server. So this one wasn't quite the savior or the chosen one so far. There were huge login issues. Now, As I need to report back to all of you on something that I deemed newsworthy, naturally I did the hard yards and I went into the front in order to give all of you an idea of just how bad things were. I guess you could think of me as kind of like the journalist that you see screaming into a mic in a war zone when there's a firefight going on somewhere in the background, and then I duck and run for cover and in. So I checked out K3. Now, it was midnight on a Saturday night in Australia, and I spent the first 50 minutes trying to log in, not knowing whether or not I should be waiting when it says connecting and just having a timeout, or if I should be spamming connect or doing the weird backdoor thing through the main Chronos server and then trying to log into K3 from there. I was talking to a few people in the Countdown to Classic Discord channel throughout the ordeal of logging in. And by the way, if you're listening to this show and you haven't already joined the Countdown to Classic Discord channel, I highly recommend you check it out, as not only is it a great group of people, but the chat is active and you can get to talk to me regularly throughout the week, as I'm pretty active on there, and you'll get a lot of insight into what goes on behind the scenes of the show, as well as being able to drive show content through suggestions to me on topics that you want to hear on the show. So if you open up the show notes on your podcast app right now, or check the bottom of this post at countdowntoclassic.com, you'll find the Discord invitation link. Hit that, come and say hi. Trust me, you won't regret it. Anyway, back from that huge self-serving detour. Sorry about that. I was chatting to the amazing people in the Countdown to Classic Discord channel, and it turned out that they were all experiencing the exact same thing that I was. And funnily enough, it turned out that this wasn't a problem that was localized to us. Obviously, as you heard from the forum post just before, many people worldwide were reporting 3-4 hour waits to get into the game, which actually made me kind of happy to have waited less than an hour to get in. But as one would say, that's what you get with pirated material, I guess. Anything unofficial won't have the kind of technical support network or hardware behind it that's perhaps required to, well, not perhaps, that is required to run such a popular product. But we move on to the next post, again, still from the K3 forums, with user Warpox, who says the following. I had the same experience. I'm not impressed, and I've wasted a lot of time trying to log in. Add in the rude population, and I don't think this is a server to play on. And that user raises, on top of the login issues, which you've already heard about, a separate point in this. The kinds of people that a private server is historically thought to attract. And those people are generally deemed to be the elitists and people who perhaps don't have the money to play retail. And thus, there's the general thought that the dominant demo in private server environments is a younger crowd, and one that is a little bit perhaps ruder or full of young punks than your average WoW player. Or perhaps they're the highly knowledgeable or skilled crowd that might not have the time for your silly pleasantries or etiquette. However, I've actually got a funny little story about that, because obviously, as I said, I dove into the game for a little bit, and I actually played the game for about 18 hours over the long weekend when it was released, or I should say the server, not the game. And I haven't played an hour since then. It's really just a little bit of an exploration that I did for this podcast. And it was really just for the most part to have that look behind the curtain as to something that I'm slightly unfamiliar with. Now, it wasn't the first time I'd touched a private server, but it was the first time I'd been on one in years. And even back then, I only took like one character to level 20 or so. I really have incredibly low private server experience. But I was fascinated by this K3 launch, and the story goes like this. I rolled an undead priest, and after dealing with the mayhem that was Death Knell, I moved on to Brill, obviously, and I picked up the second stage of that quest, Fields of Grief, from Apothecary Johann, where you need to give the laced pumpkin to the Scarlet Zealot being held captive in the cellar of Gallows End Tavern. Now, Brill was getting busier by this point as people were all leveling along around that area, and I headed along dutifully to the cellar of the tavern, and I was really bummed out when I saw that there were a crap ton of people in that area trying to hand in this quest, obviously. Now, once given the pumpkin, the Scarlet Zealot takes about 30 seconds or so to complete the animation of eating it, dying, and then miraculously respawning for the next person to hand the quest in. There would have been about 30 people, I would say, trying to basically stand on top of him, making it really hard to see in order to turn in the quest. And they were all clicking madly and hitting their macros or trying to do what they could do in order to beat everyone else to the punch. I gave up straight away. I just saw this madness and went, oh, fuck this, I'm out of here. And I went and did some other questing. I came back about 30 minutes later, and the darndest thing had happened. A line had formed that stretched all the way back to about halfway up the stairs to the cellar. I could not believe it. Everyone had organized themselves and shown far more civility than I ever would have thought could happen in World of Warcraft, and they were all sitting there abiding by the rules of the line. Now, a couple of people cut in line, but we'll get to that later, I guarantee. But what I'm trying to get at is the vast, vast majority of people did not. And everyone just waited their turn, and it all churned along quite nicely. And laugh at me as you may, I was fascinated by this, and I thought, you know what? I want to tell this story later on. So I got in the line, and eventually, it only took about 8 minutes or so. I chatted to a few people in the line, and I got to turn in the quests, and I think in that 8 minutes, 2 people cut in line, and that was it. It was really as I say, a fascinating insight into how etiquette and social rules can seep into the gaming environment. And I love that. I love seeing the good in people come out in the World of Warcraft environment. However, we move on to the next post from There's Yetis, who says this: well, Warpox, I suggest you don't play on K3 then. Go play K1 since K3 is so bad. And I have to laugh at that one because I wanted to point this out to you all. And I say this: see, private server players tell people to go play other versions of the same game too. Go back to K1. Does that sound a little familiar, everyone? Sounds a lot like some of these cries of go back to retail that we see popping up in the forums all the time. I thought that was super cute that there's even a little bit of infighting between the Kronos crowd now that they have 2 servers essentially, or obviously 3 servers to choose from. It's like, go back to your other server, you dick, if you don't like it. And now they're warring. And anyway, welcome to our party. Moving on to the next post from user Ashif, who says this: will K3 be utilizing dynamic spawns? I haven't seen anything on that yet. And one of the K3 organizers, Davros, stepped in and said yes. However, even if there are 200 plus players in a zone, don't expect instant respawns. There will still be a little bit of time in between each respawn. Why do I bring up this post? It's for this reason. If you didn't happen to see what happened when K3 opened over the long weekend, you could still imagine that it was absolute mayhem. Obviously, being a popular server and something that a lot of people were excited to check out, there were 1 million people in every starting zone. Now, don't get me wrong, some were better than others, so I heard, with people getting on the chat and saying, you think this is bad, you should see the Orc starting area and things like that. But as I said, I started in Death Knell, and, undead are relatively popular. There are a lot of undead, and I just saw absolute chaos in terms of people obviously needing their kills for their starting quests, go and get the rattle cage skeletons and things like that. And particularly with the rattle cages, that was a nightmare because of spawning issues. Now, there simply were nowhere near enough mobs to keep up with the amount of players that were evident. And when a mob was downed, it would take quite a bit of time for a respawn, perhaps, upwards of 30 seconds, sometimes 60 seconds. And when you would see a dozen people camping one spawn point, it just got to the point of farcical. But then a funny thing happened after a few hours. People started shouting out, "Hey, wait 5 seconds to loot. Wait 5 seconds to loot. Don't loot before 5 seconds has passed." And I was scratching my head going like, what the fuck are you talking about? Why do I have to wait 5 seconds before I loot? I want my loot now. And it came to light that basically, obviously the Chronos people perhaps had tinkered with things a little bit due to the amount of population that was coming up on the server. After you downed a mob, if you did wait 5 seconds before looting, it would instantly respawn, thus solving a boatload of problems. Now, I'm not sure if this is a thing that's been on other private servers, and if some of you might be laughing at me going, "Josh, can't believe you didn't know about that. Come on." But I'd never seen it before. I'd never come across it before. And it was an interesting wrinkle because it was an absolute game changer for me. Once I found that information out, I spread the word dutifully, and people sort of wouldn't believe me and were trying to say, "You're full of shit. You just don't want me to loot things." And I'm like, no, try it. It works. And it did work. It really worked most of the time. And people were like, "Holy shit, thank you so much." And that really made it a breeze to go through that starting area. However, I mean, that's not the kind of thing that Blizzard, I would think, is necessarily going to do with Classic. They're not going to have these 5-second rules. There's not going to be sort of game tinkering or little cheats that make things any better. We're all going to be dumped on a server, all put in the same area, and chaos will ensue. And dynamic respawns obviously might help, but who knows? Let's wait and see. But I just wanted to tell you that little bit of insight on the mayhem that came. We move on to this post from user Grykog, who says this: "It was still a smoother launch than Blizzard had for Warlords of Draenor, though." And that's a reasonable point. If you're not quite aware, Blizzard has had their issues too with launches of their own. The launch of Warlords of Draenor was absolutely plagued by server issues, which Blizzard ended up having to actually gift all users with 5 days of free game time in order to kind of do a bit of a mea culpa and restore some faith in the community. What actually happened was that due to the sheer number of players attempting to enter Draenor from a single location, the server ran into a multitude of issues and even suffered a DDoS attack that resulted in increased latency. Due to all the problems that the servers were undergoing, Blizzard actually had to temporarily lower the maximum realm populations, which resulted in high queue times on those high population realms. And it was pretty crazy. I do remember people, even though I wasn't playing the game at the time, I do remember people absolutely moaning and bitching about that at the time, saying, "Blizzard, you are too big of a company to have things like this going on. This is completely unacceptable." So it should be pointed out that these kind of problems still happen in this day and age to the bigwigs. So we can't expect a small group of pirates, as technically skilled as they might be, to be able to deliver us an experience that not even Blizzard themselves can pull off with 100% success rate. But we move on to the next post from user ExosDK, who says this: "It should be an absolute drop in the bucket for K3 to end up at a Blizz-like, read 2,500 to 3,500 population. The timing is just too good. If anything, they may struggle early on with too many people wanting a fresh server following the classic WoW announcement. If anything, it should stabilize at a healthy population, at least where Chronos 1 was prior to Nost dying, or following the K1 and K2 merge, around 2,000 people-ish. If they manage to do more things well, and there is no reason to think that they won't, such as the already announced change to multi-boxing, some hinted at changes to progressive/gated itemization, and any of several other little things that they could do better, in my opinion, I see no reason why we shouldn't expect the population to end up stable at higher than K1. K3 should be healthy until the release of Classic WoW." And the point there is it will be interesting to see if it is. If K3 could maintain its popularity and maintain its server health right up until the release of World of Warcraft Classic, which, as we're saying, may be perhaps even closer than we think, but, is more than likely a year or so away. So over that next year, how will people scratch that classic itch? Will they do it simply by talking to people on the forums, talking to people on Reddit, calling up their mates and say, oh my God, mate, I just have to talk about Classic with someone. Can we just talk Classic? I'm going crazy here. Or will they play retail and scratch their World of Warcraft itch that way? Or will they get out on their pirate ships and perhaps dabble in the murky waters of private servers? Because apparently some users are reporting back that they're having a great experience on K3, and as we say, moral and legal issues aside, that avenue will be available to the people who wish to choose it. And if it is healthy, it might be a viable option. Write to the show and let me know what you do. How do you scratch your itch leading up to World of Warcraft Classic? Feedback at countdowntoclassic.com. The final post I raise in relation to K3 is this one from Deathbed, who says this: I've been playing World of Warcraft for 12 plus years now. Even with the login issues yesterday, I have to admit I am very impressed with the entire Chronos team. I was deployed during vanilla and never got to experience the launch. Yesterday, I met new people from Saudi Arabia, Finland, and France. It was such a great 18 hours of playtime. Thank you so much for your hard work. Now, obviously that user is putting a little bit of praise on the people who have organized Chronos and saying that K3 was a successful launch. Despite the login issues, they still managed to have a great time and experience what World of Warcraft is all about, being revolving around that aspect of community and social interaction and just gaming with people and having a great time. Now, again, not going into moral and legal issues, that is how some people will choose to spend their time over the next year or so until we get Classic. And I just want to relay one last story of a positive story, I think, from those 18 or so hours that I spent in K3. Now, at a certain point, I thought, you know what would be good fun? I'm going to get a guild going and I'm going to do a little bit of shameless self-promotion here. So I thought, I'll start a guild called countdowntoclassic.com. And my character's name was WoW Podcaster. So I figured those two being in conjunction with each other, people might work it out. And if I stood in a major city, then you never know. Maybe one or two people would walk by me and check out the website. Maybe one or two of those people are listening right now and it totally worked. But I digress, because here's what happened. I went and got my guild charter and I was in Orgrimmar and I started, I know it's sort of a little bit rude. When I say spam, I don't think I was going crazy. It was about once every sort of 90 to 120 seconds. I would just yell in the area, hey guys, can I please get someone to sign my guild charter? We're all used to those messages. We've seen them before. So nobody got back to me, and I figured, it's been a really long time since I tried to start a guild. Maybe I'll offer some tips. Maybe that will get the trick done. And so I started to yell, 50 bronze tips for anyone who signs my guild charter. And I waited, and no one got back to me. So I again said, I'm going to have to up the ante here, but I don't have that much cash. All right, I'll go nuts. 1 silver tips for signing my guild charter. Come find me at the auction house. And that's what got them in. So eventually people started to come up nicely and sign my guild charter. And I do thank very much so Countdown to Classic Discord user Thedo, who came up and signed it for free and found me. And I thank you very much. Shout out to Thedo. I did appreciate that. However, there was one person while I was waiting for these signatures who was just kind of skulking around me outside the auction house. An orc rogue, I believe it was. And I do forget the character's name. I wish I could remember it because it would really help. But either way, they kept emoting me such and such laughs at you, such and such cries with you, such and such waves at you, and things of that nature. So I basically said to him, hey, I don't suppose you're interested in signing my guild charter, are you? And it just emote, such and such shakes his head. And I said to him, you're not much of a talker, are you? Emote, such and such shakes his head. And then they started laughing at me some more. And the whole time they were just jumping and jumping around me and doing circles around me. And this went on for about 5 to 10 minutes. And I just thought, that's part of the reason that I love WoW. These eccentric characters. I mean, this guy was effectively role-playing a deaf mute. And I think I actually asked that of him. I said, are you trying to do a little bit of a character thing here where you don't say anything? And he nodded in agreement. And I thought, this person's taking time out of their day to spend 10 minutes not really fucking with me, but just having a bit of fun with me. And I can't think of all the things I'd rather do with 10 minutes of my time, but that's what makes this community amazing, is that there are all these eccentric people out there in a way. It's not all of us, but that's what makes up a community, is that there are people who are a little bit fun, feisty, or crazy, that do these weird things that make us scratch our heads. And I had forgotten about that, and I miss that about World of Warcraft. So I just thought I'd relay that story, and just, if anyone's got a story like that from back in the day in vanilla or on K3, please write to the show and let me know and go, oh, you think that's a weirdo? I'll one up your weirdo story, hear about this person and what they did. Please do write to the show and let me know, everyone. But with that, we'll now move on to the third topic of this particular episode. And that topic is, what are some of the bad things that you perhaps remember about World of Warcraft in the vanilla days? And the reason I bring this up is that I came across a post from a user on the official Classic forums, Nightrom, who posted this: what did you not like in vanilla WoW? Now, this kind of post does come up a lot. It's not really anything new. It's just something that seems to prop up its head every now and again, but it's always a little bit of fun. So it's just interesting in that obviously I've got this podcast where we spend so much time just bowing before the altar that is World of Warcraft in the vanilla days and just heaping so much praise on this product. It is fun every now and again to realize that, hey, let's take off the nostalgia goggles a little bit. Whether or not the nostalgia goggles exist is another question. Check episode 1. But let's remember as well the sort of more frustrating things and things we flat out did not like about World of Warcraft back in the day. And I'll begin with this post from user Sid Frostfire, who we're actually going to hear from a bit because they put in a lot of very good posts on this thread. And they start with this: I didn't like how vague some of the quests were about where to go or what to do. Take the ring to someone who might be interested in it. The thing you're looking for is somewhere to the north. In the days before the world map showed quest objective locations, those were a pain in the arse. I eventually discovered Thoughtbot and managed to get through most of them with it. Also, quest items that took like 5 minutes to respawn and could only be looted by one player at a time. I'm thinking specifically of that Bucket of Bolts quest on whatever it was called in the Dwarf starting zone, but there were a lot of others like it. Quest items would take forever to spawn, then you'd have a bunch of people waiting to pounce on them. And that's a very interesting point. At least I want to focus on the initial point there of the vague nature of quest text. Now, every time I hear the word Thoughtbot, it does have a little bit of a Pavlovian effect on me where I just want to open up a browser and search for a quest location straight away. God, I abused Thoughtbot back in the day. I'm sure we all did. But we had to rely not only on Thoughtbot, but also in the early days, sometimes there wasn't quite enough information on Thoughtbot. Or if you played the game from launch, Thoughtbot wasn't even really an option because there were no entries. So you had to live and die by the quest text. And when I dove in on K3 over the weekend, I found myself having to lean on the quest text all over again. I wasn't really looking a lot of stuff up. I thought, no, I'll actually try and just do this stuff the old-fashioned way. And wow, did I get lost a few times. And I thought, God, this must have been frustrating back in the day when you weren't looking anything up or you had nothing at your disposal. And I love that portion of it when we were the Wild Wild West and Blizzard just left us to our own devices. And I don't necessarily see this as a negative, but I'd love to hear from you guys. Did you find the vague quest text as a negative in that you just wanted them to be a little bit more specific and sometimes they were stupidly vague where you found yourself crossing over half a zone? Or, like obviously the Man Creek's Wife famous quest that everyone talks about, or do you think it was actually a positive because it got you off your ass and adventuring? You went out and devoured every corner of a zone because you didn't know really what you were looking for. Let me know. We move on to user Dewan, who says this. I would say the reused assets and models. One good example is caves. How many of the same cave did you see over and over again? Hell, it was even used all the way through Wrath. Even to this day, I see it as incredibly lazy on Blizzard's part. Having come from older MMOs on to WoW at the time, it really irked me how someone as large as Blizzard did not put much effort in areas of their world design. One of my favorite things in older MMOs were the large and unique open world dungeons. So to see all the effort go into closed off instances and stuff like caves and mines nothing more than a copy-paste layout kind of irked me. Now, I didn't really notice or care as much about this as this user did. But yes, I do appreciate that with the vast amount of geography that Blizzard basically has to cover in this game, sure, we're going to get a little bit of a copy-paste jobs. And that does happen, as they say, not just with the locations, but also with the models. A lot of people complained that certain mobs and certain bosses were just the same models over and over again, and it gave some people the shits. Personally, I didn't care as much. I had just as much fun. But it is interesting to see, you don't see as many shots, in my opinion, at Blizzard on the actual look of the game, of the design of the game. So tell me what you guys think. We move on to this post from user CoWave, who says this. Travel times. I'm quite happy that Blizzard went back and added more flight paths in addition to lowering the level requirements for mounts. Now again, I hate to sound like a broken record here, but I have to disagree. I secretly, or not even secretly, I openly loved long travel times. I do completely understand and respect the argument that comes from people who say, why the fuck would you want long travel times, Josh? It's 2018. We've got other shit to do. The whole point is to get from A to B as soon as possible. Let's take the time doing the actual quest, not traveling to it. However, I say this in return, and this is not an unknown response by any means. The walk to the place that you had to go is what made the world feel epic. This was the World of Warcraft, and I can't stress that word, world, enough. Blizzard had to make this feel so incredibly expansive that it was just epic. The scale, the grandeur of everything had to be dialed up to 11. How do you help achieve that? Slow down travel times, make it feel like it is an incredible effort and time sink to get to certain places. Sure, it wasn't a 20-minute walk from Goldshear to Stormwind, but let's just take a smaller one, for example. Even just a journey as simple as, say, from Brill to Shadowfang Keep. It's a little bit of a walk. And obviously there's a million examples that are 20 times longer than that. But you put the time in happily, and I did. I loved to see things. I loved to look around as I just walked along a road, or as I went along on my flight path. I loved looking around, just manipulating the camera and going, look at that thing over there. Little island over there I never noticed. Oh, look down there. I never saw that group of mobs. That's quite interesting. That is what engaged me and made me feel like I was a tiny little snowflake in this huge, huge world. And I personally loved it. Write to the show and let me know what you guys thought. The next post we have comes from user Luga, who says this: I liked weapon training. I didn't like literally every weapon having its own training level, and certain races starting off with certain proficiencies, and each other weapon requiring paid training to learn, and certain weapons only being taught in certain capitals, and some training such as dual wielding or polearms costing much more. All of those combined were frustrating. A few select ones being more obvious, while culling others would have made my younger self happy. And I do agree with this one. I did like weapon training, but I didn't like everything that Luga mentions after that. And again, just reminded myself of this when I played K3 over the weekend. I had completely forgotten the point where only certain weapon masters in certain cities taught certain weapons. That really gave me the shits when I was trying to level up my little priest and get them to pick up certain skills. But I guess, hey, that's the game. If you're going to do no changes, that's the way it's going to be. You deal with the pain and you learn to live. And I'm more than happy to do that. It was a rude awakening and a rude reminder as to how vanilla can be. But you know what? I was totally okay with it and was like, oh yeah, that's right. That sucks, but I secretly love it. The next post, we go back to user Sid Frostfire from the beginning of this topic, who says this: quest items that took forever to respawn. And we touched on that earlier, obviously. Felix's Tools is a good example. It's a dwarf starting quest where this gnome quest giver dropped his tools at various areas that are now troll camps and wants you to retrieve them. It was like 3 different items on the ground spread around various troll camps that you had to pick up. Problem is, they took forever to respawn when someone looted them, and only one person could loot them at a time. So one would spawn, and you'd have like 4 people waiting to pounce on it. Also, there was a cast timer on looting the items, and troll NPCs around the area could respawn, hit you, and interrupt that. And also, other players would jump in and ninja the item while you were stuck fighting the troll. Quests like that were annoying, and I usually just skipped them. And that brings me to a point that we haven't touched on Countdown to Classic. My loathing and hatred of the item cast timer. When you interact with an item for a quest and you see that timer go down and you have people around you trying to get at the same item and you're just sitting there going, come on baby, go, 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 please tell me I hit that first, only to be mortified when you discovered that you absolutely did not and that you would be the loser waiting around for a little bit longer for that quest item. That was probably one of my biggest bugaboos with World of Warcraft vanilla. I really did get the shits many, many times with that. And also just kind of the tagging of mobs in general. Now, would I change it? Not on your life. It's fucking essential and part of the fun. But I did tear my hair out on many occasions when you had to kill X amount of mobs for a quest and you found that perhaps I stupidly accidentally hit a dot first and the tick doesn't go over when someone else has just straight up meleeed it and tagged it. And I'm like, damn you. The amount of times. Oh God, like I said, world's worst player over here, guys. Now the next post is a very interesting one from user Mistwind, who says this: I loved Vanilla WoW, but that said, there were things that could have been a lot better, especially with hindsight and experience from WoW's expansions. So what did I not like in Vanilla? Well, one of them was the death spiral. You see, with smaller server populations and 40-player raids and no cross-server gameplay if you're in an upper-tier guild on your server, you had to attend raids religiously to defend your raiding spot. However, in some of the tougher raids like AQ40 and Nax, guilds started to experience the death spiral, and going through it was never fun. So what's the death spiral, you ask? Well, here's the death spiral explained. When a guild got stuck on a boss in progression, sometimes for weeks or even months, a few players might get bored and quit the game, or get poached by a higher progressed guild. If the people quitting happens to be in key positions, such as a tank or a healer, your guild progression was further stalled while you recruited replacements. The only place to get replacements was to poach them from less progressed guilds. Those replacements were never as geared as your main raiders, and the only place to get gear was to farm the bosses you could kill and give them the drops. Basically, this meant progression was further stalled another few weeks while you geared the replacements. During this additional delay, a few more of your raid's best players might get poached by a higher progressed guild, or they might simply get bored, burn out and quit. When that happened, you needed to recruit and gear yet more replacements, causing a further delay. And during this delay, you lost more players and so on. The result was a death spiral, which could kill a guild's progression permanently. Back in vanilla, I was in a guild called Immortality on the Silver Hand server. It was the number 3 guild on the server in terms of raid progression. The guild got stuck on Twin Emps in AQ40 and then, over a few months, went through the death spiral. The guild never downed a new boss again in vanilla, and by the time the spiral had ended, approximately 35 of the original 40 raid team members had quit the guild. The guild still existed with the new recruits, but it was basically an entirely new group of people and no longer capable of progression. The death spiral was also significant in that when it happened, it created a chain reaction effect that affected just about every lower progressed raid guild downstream. That was a really interesting post, and probably something that I arguably could have put in this week's winners and losers, and something that, whilst I knew of, I'd never really sat down and thought about. That trickle-down effect that comes from a guild stalling on their progression, and the constant ebb and flow of poaching and frustration that comes, and the need to gear up as people go through this cycle of life with trying to get through the content. Now, obviously, some of you high-end content raiders would be nodding your heads right now going, absolutely, oh my God, thank God Josh finally talked about this. Our plight has been known. But I would love for one of you to call into the show and give me a story about your guild's issues with the death spiral. This really does fascinate me, and I feel like there would be some fantastic stories with some really intricate details that could be heard on the show. So email me and say, Josh, I want to call you and tell you my story, and I will air it if it is a captivating one. So guys, please do get in touch with me. And we move on again to Sid Frostfire, who says this. Also, if you were a tank, you were screwed if people didn't pay attention to aggro, as it was an uphill battle being rage-starved. This could be annoying at times. All those go, 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 go people who'd launched World War III on everything while I was waiting for the healer to drink, for the mage to sheep a target, or whatever else. Or just burn any target I wasn't on, even when I had stuff marked. Then proceed to blame the noob tank who can't hold aggro when they died. One of many reasons I switched to Fury and never looked back when BC came out. And that's a fair point. I can only imagine the frustration of tanks back in the vanilla days when you came up with a bunch of pugs who basically had people who were a little bit too keen to get moving. And yes, granted, some of the content in vanilla wasn't overly difficult, and there were a lot of instances where you could just kind of motor through things at times. But for the most part, there was a lot of tactics involved, and there was a lot of patience required, and you had to wait for people to drink, and you had to wait for people to mark things. So I had been a member of many of those pugs that had many a wipe because of an overzealous, usually, DPS person, not me. I was a good little rogue who would just rush in and as this poster says, the go, go, go attitude, and screaming that in the chat. I always found it very, very frustrating. And yes, I agree. That is something I don't particularly miss about vanilla, but I'm very much so looking forward to seeing again. And the final post on this final topic of forum and fauna for this week, and I do hope you've enjoyed yourself, everyone. There's plenty more to come and a lot more fun to be had in this episode, so stick around. But the final post is this one from Guild A, when talking about what were the things that you disliked the most about World of Warcraft vanilla. And they say this: the day it ended. Oh, that's a heartbreaking post and so true. And I hope all of you just let out a big "aww," because we all feel the same way. Yes, the worst thing about World of Warcraft vanilla was the moment when it was over. And we all miss it so much, and we can't wait to get it back, and we're getting it back, and that's the best news ever. So, on that positive note, it's time for anger management. Each episode, Countdown to Classic comes to you with some of the angriest posts that I've found on the forums through the week. And the first post comes from Reddit user PowerWord John, who says the following: Dude, if I gotta wait 4 fucking years for them to drop a vanilla server, I'm not gonna play. There is no way in hell it takes twice the time it took to make a new retail expansion to open a damn vanilla server. If that's the case, then me and probably many others will simply go back to private servers to satiate ourselves. I figured in 4 years, I'll be playing some fucking virtual reality Star Citizen shit. It's hard to find a good game these days, and I'm sorry, but waiting till I'm over 30 years old for vanilla sounds ridiculous to me. At Countdown to Classic, toss me in that next episode's anger management. I listen to your podcast all the time at work. Peace. Consider it done, PowerWord John. And next we have user Cruciderp from Reddit, who says this: you're exactly the sort of person who sounds like a condescending Stop calling the game ugly. Vanilla is a beautiful game. Did I say it was the best graphics? Chill your shit. Next, we have a submission from Wheelboy3 with regards to K3, and they say the following: all the K3 posts talking about their bugs, and no one is mentioning that the most effective way to level is to abuse the group experience reduction change and dynamic respawns. Probably because everyone complaining got to level 14, haha. There's a warrior streaming himself AFK, following while 2 mages AoE farm, and they level absurdly fast. You want a party of 5 to increase dynamic respawn rate. K3 makes a change to the quest experience rewards to reflect vanilla WoW, but make this busted experience change, and now it's just punishment for anyone who can't use this method. Take this as anecdotal evidence of why making any changes to vanilla WoW without critical thinking about the ramifications could be terrible. I used this method from 30 to 33 and it blows traditional leveling out of the water. It's not even close. I've slowly crawled to level 35 since then, and having to play without this method has really killed my motivation to finish. And finally, we're going to finish with a personal bit of anger management. A submission from yours truly. This is my little bit of a rant, and it goes like this. Joe Lamb and Bone Shaker from K3. You two are dirty, dirty line cutters, and I'm guessing that you punch babies in the face as well. Also, Dean Cage, yeah, you buddy, you totally stole Anissa Agaman from under the noses of my lovely little pug group, who were patiently waiting for the spawn, you jerk. I'm pretty sure that means you're the kind of person that doesn't flush toilets once you're done with them. Mic drop. And that's been anger management. And with all that being done, now it's time for winners and losers.
It wasn't going to be easy, but they've won it.
Every Monday, Countdown to Classic comes to you with some of the funniest or more insightful and intelligent posts that I've tripped upon through my adventures in the forums through the week. And the first post that I bring you comes in relation to the BFA announcement. And this is from Reddit user Brother95, who says this: I totally agree that plenty of BFA players will give Classic a try, and this is why. I think it would be a very bad business decision for Blizzard to release the game during the first year of Battle for Azeroth. All further points are separate from expected realistic timelines, and simply focusing on which launch time is better. Simply put, it'll cannibalize the two player bases because people won't have the time to get to a stopping point in Classic in order to return to Battle for Azeroth for the next content update. When we still saw sub numbers, WoW's biggest issue was its retention rate. People completed endgame progression too quickly, left, and didn't return for content updates. If Classic is released during the first 2 to 3 months of Battle for Azeroth, then it will be taking a good number of Battle for Azeroth's players and putting them into Classic. It'll only be 1 to 2 months until the next major content update. At this point, most people won't have an established endgame character, or even a level 60 in Classic. So they'll have to choose whether or not they go back to Battle for Azeroth to do the new raids, or continue working on their Classic character. As we saw in the sub numbers, once most people stopped playing, they didn't return. So we can expect similar behavior between retail and Classic. If people stick with Classic, they will likely not return at all to retail, because once they can start committing real time to Battle for Azeroth again, the raids will be on farm, and they've missed the boat on the excitement of new content. I love that post. That was very, very sort of insightful into sort of the attitudes and play behavior that we might see in the strange world where Battle for Azeroth is released somewhere around Classic. And I know a lot of people have ruled that out as a possibility, but despite when they're released in relation to each other, they're still going to coexist at a certain point. So it is going to be interesting to see how the players react in terms of, will people be playing both? And if so, how will they do it? Or will they quit one to go to the other? Time will tell. But we move on to the next winner, who is from the official forums and the user Bahomera, who says this in relation to the private server issue. I don't care if you spent the last 10 plus years breaking the terms of service and not giving Blizzard a cent. You spoke with your wallet, sure, but quit being hostile towards even the discussion of change. You know when WoW had the most subscribers? Wrath, we had 12 million, not in vanilla, not in BC. So quit acting as the authority because you played on a rogue server, which wasn't Blizzard quality. I mean, have you seen your community? I've seen Reddit posts. Some of these servers steal, lie, and cheat each other. Is that the community you want to be a part of? I was watching some YouTube videos about Classic WoW and stumbled upon one where they gave the responses of the private servers. Not even all the private servers are shutting down. Some are still planning on running after the Classic WoW servers will go live. So there goes your argument for your community. Blizzard is trying to throw you an olive branch here. It's a whole lot easier to give you a Blizzard quality server than have their legal department send out letters and sue those servers. Your opinion is valued, but so are the opinions of those who were loyal to Blizzard and played the game despite despite changes that happened. Please get off of your high horse. You played a modified version of the game. Tell us about it. Many people who played through 04 to 06 may not remember it. You guys have recent memories. Remind us about them. Tell us what we have forgotten. Don't whine like little children, because you're going to further grow the stereotype of private server players. Children who can't afford the real game, so they play the knockoff. I thought that was a rather measured response to a bit of flack that user was responding to in that thread regarding the attitudes of private server players. And as I touched on earlier, there is the predominant thought that that's where the elitist jerks go and that's where the kids go, blah, blah, blah. But I can tell you that in my very brief experience in K3, like I said, the vast majority of people, like with most things, were reasonable, upstanding, fun, nice people who you would love to play a game with. It is unfortunately the minority, and perhaps the loud minority, that can give those servers a bit of a bad reputation in terms of the kinds of people that inhabit them. Now, regardless of whether the private servers themselves should have a bad reputation due to what it is that they're doing, that's another thing. But I think that before we throw people under the bus for being the kind of person that plays a private server, this user reminds us they actually have a lot of valuable input. And let's not forget, are really the reason why we're getting World of Warcraft Classic in the first place. But we move on to the final winner of the week. And this was user Ernie Miser, again from the official forums, who says this. And this was in relation to things that you don't like about World of Warcraft Vanilla. I honestly can't think of anything that I really did not like about Vanilla, other than maybe that I did not start playing sooner. I've been thinking about it since seeing this post, and even before that, and I've just come up blank. I wasn't a gamer type player. I didn't play games on computer, on consoles. I was too busy living life, working, gardening, quilting, cooking, baking, etc. My ex-husband played it from day one, and I was disgusted by the time he put in that game. It wasn't until I got smacked with health issues and disabled that I began playing. Were I able to continue with my living life, I would not have started then. What so many found to be issues, especially with guilds and lack of a bank, I found ways to get those issues to keep my brain active. I basically treated the game like a job. I leveled all the professions, not the characters, unless I had to in order to advance to the next tier again. I played the auction house and made gold hand over fist. I loved farming for my materials to make things that I sold, basically everything. My hope is that I can go back to that kind of playstyle again, where professions mattered. Making gold wasn't as easy as pushing a couple of buttons, and people needed other profession materials to craft what they made, and not everyone making alts with all the professions to be self-sufficient. So yeah, I'm in the no changes crowd, but I don't respond #no changes to every suggestion. That's as irritating as gold sellers in Ironforge. Okay, there. I found something. Gold sellers. That's what I didn't like about World of Warcraft Vanilla. And I think that was a really touching post to go out on. Someone who racks their brain to think of something bad about World of Warcraft and just sits there and says, you know what? No, I loved this game so freaking much that warts and all, I made it work. I learned to love the bad points of the game and twisted them in my favor to the point that every single skerrick of this experience was a positive. Except for the gold sellers. And with that, when we have winners, obviously everyone, we have to have a loser. That's how games are played. Now, I'll keep the name out of it to protect the innocent, but this user from the official forums, when talking on that topic of what did you not like about World of Warcraft Vanilla, said the following. Let's see. class balance, itemization, interrupts on the global cooldown, horrible graphics, HP sponge bosses, boring leveling, the fact that hybrids were just healers, the god-awful PvP system, Alterac Valley, slow content releases. Just some of the things off the top of my head. The only thing I missed from vanilla was the community. Outside of that, it was a god-awful experience that I will never return to. And to that person, I say this. Why the hell were you playing the game if you hated it so much? Now, I was trying to figure out whether or not that was a troll post, and look, it very well may have been, but I think they were being actually somewhat sincere. Those were some pretty specific examples, and yeah, there were a boatload of them, but they say, hey, I liked the community, that was the good thing, and the actual game was actually pretty shitty. And I say, you know what, sir? We don't want you in World of Warcraft Classic. Go away and go play something else. Leave it to the fans. What are you doing writing in the forums anyway with that kind of stuff? Just bizarre. Anyway, you're the loser of the week. And with that, it's time for Memory Lane. Every Monday, Countdown to Classic comes to you with some people's funniest experiences from the World of Warcraft vanilla days. But this week, guess what, everyone? None of you wrote to me. You've all been so good in every Monday episode up to this, but no one wrote a Memory Lane story to me. So, I could chastise you and completely skip Memory Lane this week and say, bad listeners, none of you wrote anything to me. But I would never deprive you of content, and there might be some people who are listening to this for the first time. So, here's what a Memory Lane segment sounds like, and I had to pluck some of these off the World of Warcraft official forums, but next week, of course, all of you will write to me, and there'll be listener submissions, as they normally are. So the first submission comes from the World of Warcraft official forums, as I said, from user VivFTW, who says this. One of my fondest memories of vanilla was from a hilarious bug that happened to me. Back then, the hardcore PvPers like myself wouldn't always have their group online to do battlegrounds with, so we would queue solo while they weren't around. Well, one day I was solo queuing battlegrounds and accidentally ended up in a Warsong Gulch with another player from my guild, who was coincidentally another gnome mage. So we were playing the match, and as always, it was reaching an intense moment, but suddenly I got disconnected from the game. When I logged back on, I found out that my guildie had also been disconnected from the game. We both logged back in at the same time, and we were high up in the sky in the Thousand Needles zone, falling to our deaths. It all happened so fast that neither of us had the presence of mind to use slow fall, and we both splattered all over the ground. We started cracking up, wondering how in the world we got from Warsong Gulch to the sky of Thousand Needles, and then went on our way playing more battlegrounds. Fast forward a couple of days later, and we accidentally ended up in another Warsong Gulch together, and the exact same thing happened again. No joke, the exact same thing. We were amazed. I will never forget that. And the second story for Memory Lane this week comes from user Shalia, who says this. I rolled on a PvE server thinking I would be safe from PvP. Then I discovered contested areas and rogues. So he ganked me and basically put a campfire on my corpse, killing me a few more times. I was already livid at being flagged on a PvE server, so I snapped. When the timer ran down and I could res, I did so in a bush behind a tree. I shadow melded, and then I stalked him, and every opportunity I got, I dropped him like a bad habit. I don't mean I killed him once or twice. His character was etched in my memory, and if I saw it in that area, it was marked for death. Do you have a funny PvP story? I feel like PvP is absolutely ripe for Memory Lane segments. So, Write to me and let me know, guys. Feedback at countdowntoclassic.com. But we move on to the next memory lane story from user Beowulf, who says this. This wasn't funny for me until years later, but after patch 1.7 it didn't matter. I was questing through Badlands on my Night Elf Hunter when I got a whisper from someone I didn't know, a level 50-something pally. He asked me if I was interested in Broken Tooth, which he had noticed had just spawned. Broken Tooth spawned 3 times a day, and all 3 spawn points were usually heavily camped, as he was everyone's favourite battleground pet. I had never heard of Broken Tooth, so my new friend told me to get my ass to where he was and gave me the Broken Tooth story as I was running, dodging, and sometimes fighting mobs along the way. When I got there, I saw Broken Tooth and I fell in love. I threw away the pet I had and proceeded to throw some of that love at Broken Tooth. Part way through the channeled cast, a high-level human shadow priest comes along and kills him. What the fuck? I was livid. There was, however, nothing I could do about it. I whispered to his guild that he was a total jerk. I think I used somewhat stronger language than just jerk. The jerk's guildmaster just laughed at me. My guild advised me to just let it go. I should have taken their counsel. For a few weeks I joined the campers, and 3 times each day, 15 minutes before the expected spawn times, I logged into the hunter and dared to hope. Sometimes there are as many as 8 other hunters, both factions doing the same. It was a PvE server, else there could have been some serious bloodshed. I wonder how it played out on PvP servers. I never had the chance to see. I stewed about that insult until way down the track, when all pets were normalized, that being nerfed, in patch 1.7. Now, thankfully, I'm able to laugh about it. And the final story for Memory Lane this week comes from user Hitu, who says this. I was in a raiding guild and our guild leader was a real jerk. He was the kind who yelled and screamed at his raiders for every minor mistake and would personally insult them. He told someone the position for a boss was near the autoclave, and the guy he was instructing asked what an autoclave was. 2 minutes of shouting later, he dropped that guy from the raid. That's what I was dealing with. Anyway, I made a little hunter ult on Alliance side to blow off steam between raids. No one knew me. I didn't know anyone. And at some point I decided that my goal in life was going to be the worst hunter I could be. I accidentally left my pet on aggressive. I refused to turn pet taunt off. I broke my own traps. I told every group that I was in that hunters didn't need mana and would never drink. I was horrible. I do love all of those stories, and see how fun Memory Lane can be, everyone. Let's all get back on board with Countdown to Classics Memory Lane. And please write to me. I want to see a flood of submissions for next week, so that I not only have them for next week, but for many weeks to come. But anyway, guys, I'm going to wrap it up now with a few tidbits about the show and where we're going in the future, and a few shout outs. So I just want to let you all know that, guess what? Singapore watch is over. They caved in and we finally got a download from Singapore. So thank you, Singapore. That didn't last terribly long. I think we actually got them about 5 days after I mentioned it. So hooray, Singapore. I'm glad to have you on board. But of course, with Singapore watch now being over, we've got to put someone else on notice. So guess who I've picked? Hey, Paraguay. Pull your fingers out. Your South American neighbors are making you look silly here. Brazil loves the show. Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, Venezuela, they're all on board. So what are you doing? Come on, you're going to let them win? Now, if you're living in South America and listening to this show, kick a friend in the bum who lives in Paraguay and get them to listen to the show. Now, I'd love to go there myself and ask them to do it, but I'm busy here in Australia making podcasts for you, so get on it. Come on, Paraguay. We'd love to have you on board. Now, just a few points of interest for you all. There is a giveaway I'm doing on Twitter at the moment. So I'm giving away 1 month of game time to 3 lucky users. And all you need to do is find my Twitter account, which is Count2Classic. So it's with the number 2. So Count2Classic on Twitter. Go look me up. And if you find my tweet, and I'm sending it out every now and again, so just keep your eyes out about the competition. All you need to do is like that tweet, follow me on Twitter, and retweet that tweet, and you go in the running for 1 month of free retail game time. So please do, everyone, get on Twitter, get amongst it, tell your friends, let's spread a bit of the love and get a bit of attention coming towards Countdown to Classic. And if I have to spend money and give stuff away, I'm more than happy to do that for you guys. Next up, a bit of interesting news today. I finally heard back from Blizzard. I emailed them about a week ago and said, hey, my name's Josh. I'm doing a podcast, Countdown to Classic. Would love to get on your media list and possibly open the door for interviews later down the track. And they didn't write back for a week, and I was like, oh, well, I guess there goes that train. But they finally got back to me today, and I heard from them saying, hey, Josh, we're happy to put you on the media list. You'll now be getting announcements as they come out, and glad to have you on board. So it's a start. I'll take it. And thank you to Blizzard. That's fantastic. Now, the next thing is I got straight back to them and said, look, I don't mean to push my luck, but that's fantastic and thank you so much. But now let's kind of talk, how the hell do I go about getting an interview with someone from Blizzard? And I went as far as saying, hell, I'll take the janitor at this point if he's got something to say about World of Warcraft. So I hope, I dream that one day I'll be able to bring you guys someone from Blizzard in an interview. But speaking of interviews, I conducted my first 2 interviews over the weekend, and I can't wait to bring those to you all. So that's the reason why at the top of the show I said, now Countdown to Classic very well might be regularly coming to you on a Friday as well. So 3 episodes per week. A lot of you got back to me and said, Josh, if you can do it and you're not going to run yourself into an early grave, we would love to have 3 episodes per week. So I'm going to give it a shot. Let's see how it goes, everyone. Now, I'm going to try and do Monday, Wednesdays and Fridays as much as I can. But what I would ask is a little bit of lenience on your part, that as much as I'll try to stick to that schedule. But if I'm ever a day late on a podcast, please don't send an angry email my way saying, Josh, where the fuck's the show? I guarantee you I won't have forgotten about you. Sometimes I do just need that extra day to put a little bit of polish on the show. But for the most part, I think we're now 5 weeks into the show. Only 2 of the last 13 episodes, I believe, have I been a little bit slow in getting an episode to you by 1 day. So we've been pretty good so far. So I'll try and keep that up. But I interviewed Super Soaker and another listener named Dustin, who called into the show and gave a phenomenal interview about speed running in raids, which I was absolutely fascinated by and on the edge of my seat for. So I can't wait to bring those to you. What's going to happen is I'm going to release this Friday, first of all, actually not an interview. I've got a little bit of a fun breakdown of the Warcraft movie coming your way. And that's a sit-down chat with the 2 jokers that I do my other podcast with, the Cinephiles. And we're at cinephiles.com. That's SINNERFILES.com. So if you like movies and you like to laugh, because I guarantee you we're actually pretty funny guys, and I'm trying to say that with, as funny as it sounds, as much humility as possible, but I guarantee you we are actually kind of tongue-in-cheek pretty funny. If you like movies, go and check us out. But what we're going to do is, the other day we recorded a podcast on the Warcraft movie, and we had a bit of fun with it. There are some serious angles that we get on with it, and it does go into the ins and outs of filmmaking, but also we have a bit of tongue-in-cheek fun. So please do listen if you're interested in hearing about the Warcraft movie. If you're not interested, just skip that one, no hard feelings, or just download it anyway and don't listen. That would really help me out. But What's going to happen is on the following Friday, April 20th, I will bring you Dustin's interview. And then on April the 27th, the Friday after that, I'll bring you the interview with Super Soaker, who was fantastic as well, as we got into the ins and outs of basically guild management, having a officer role within a guild and the kind of responsibilities that came with that, being a class leader within a guild, rogue play, YouTubing, all of that jazz. It was a really, really interesting interview with Super Soaker, and I loved him taking the time out of his busy schedule to come on the show and talk to me. It was fantastic. But guess what, everyone? Those two got on the show because they reached out to me. Now, I've reached out to a bunch of people and said, hey, would you consider coming on Countdown to Classic at all? And virtually all of them have not replied to me, which is fine. Perhaps we're still small fry. I appreciate that. But people have gotten in touch with me and said, hi, Josh, my name is so-and-so. I would love to be on the show because I have a particular set of expertise in World of Warcraft that I think your listeners would really like to hear about. So, if you think you fit that mold, and if you think you could talk in an interview style show for an hour where I pepper you with questions about your field of expertise within the game, then hit me up at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com and let me know what it is that you want to tell the world about from your perspective. I would love to at least talk to you about the potential of coming on the show. And eventually, everyone, as I said, I'd love to do a talkback radio style version of the show. We will see how that goes. In weeks that I perhaps don't have an interview lined up, I might just jump on Discord, jump on Twitter and say, hey, if you got 2 minutes of chat you want to have with me, a particular point you want to raise about World of Warcraft, call into the show and we'll just chat. And then we might even have a little bit of like a three-way chat, have some people disagreeing on topics and have me moderating a bit of a back and forth on one particular tense topic. Let's see how we go. Either way, I'm really confident about the future of the show, everyone. Everything is moving upwards. The downloads are only going up. I'm hoping basically to go over 3,000 for this week. Over 70 countries worldwide are now listening to Countdown to Classic. I couldn't be happier. It's all because of you. Please do go out and tell a friend about the show. So many of you have been getting back to me saying, yes, Josh, I told a friend, I told a family member. Thank you so much to all of you. Please jump in the Discord channel. Can't wait to see you on Wednesday. See you guys. Bye.